Hello and welcome to this BCS, the Chartered Institute for IT interview. Today I'm with Art Gilliland, who is a Senior Vice President and General Manager of HP Security Products. Art, thank you for joining me.
It's my pleasure, thank you.
Now, I wonder if we could sort of kick off with the sort of things that you do. What do you do in your job?
Yep, so I am responsible for the strategy around the products that we build, as well as the teams that build and sell our technology. So essentially I own the business results and the technologies for the enterprise security products at HP.
Okay. So in terms of your sort of security direction at HP, what sort of issues are you starting to see? What are the biggest drivers for security?
I think one of the things that's happening in security is sort of the companies are being smashed between two pretty immutable forces that are happening in security. On one side, they have an ecosystem, a market-based ecosystem for stealing and selling and sort of exploiting information from companies. And this market-based adversary is one side of that force. On the other side of the force, companies are radically adopting new platforms for service delivery and service consumption. So things like mobility and cloud computing and new ways of interacting with their customers and their employees. And that explosion of platforms, technical platforms, creates a lot more of a surface area for this really efficient adversary to attack. And those two things kind of slam together, and the inevitability of that is breach, essentially. And then to make it worse, sort of salt in the wound, then when there's a breach, there's a perception of negligence. Okay. And when there's a perception of negligence, governments step in to help with regulatory requirements and other things. And so again, another pressure starts to build because of those two things that are happening. And so I think that, simplistically, is what's going on for a lot of the space in the security world.
So, other than just buying HP products, what can companies, IT directors, CIOs do to address these problems?
Yeah, and I think the first one is to really think differently about the way we build our security programs. I think there's a part of what we do in general which is pretty similar, which is we need to understand the business requirements, really think about what we're trying to accomplish from business, what risks are appropriate or not appropriate, what information do we care most about. That is pretty motherhood and apple pie. People want to start with that, and they start with that in the old world as well as the new world. Yeah. The old world would also then follow the checklist compliance that you have, whether it's regulatory compliance like a PCI or a government regulatory requirement, or even just frameworks like ISO. And you have these checklists, which are good, but for an individual company, they don't help make you more secure. They just tell you sort of a roadmap that you could follow. Yeah. I think what we need to add to that is a better understanding of how the adversary attacks us. Right. And build capabilities to basically be disruptive in the process the adversary uses. And so I think the more we focus on working to disrupt how they research against us, helping to disrupt how they break in, helping to disrupt how they map out our environment, basically find them after they've broken in but before they've stolen data, and then be more explicit about how we disrupt their ability to capture the data they want. If we build capabilities like that, I think our security programs will be more effective and our companies will have less damage from breach.
Okay. Now, obviously, a big threat to businesses comes from, unfortunately, the staff who are working within the industry, within a company, because they, through practices, just through mistakes or sometimes negligence. What sort of ways are you seeing people coming to you saying, how can you help us with this?
How do we help them improve the employees' behavior?
Can you do that?
I think there's a couple of things that I would say about that. I mean, I think if you look at the breaches that occur, they usually are taking advantage of either a mistake that an employee made, or the employee is being tricked by an external adversary, or the employee is malicious. So those are the sort of the things that happen. I may email out some data, that's a breach. I get tricked into giving away my credentials, breach. I think better security awareness is one of those things. And so, the part of what we could do for companies is to help them understand what they care about, help them do a security assessment, and then build a program around education for users. But there's a big debate, whether you should waste your time trying to educate users because they're going to still do silly stuff, or if it'd be better to spend that resource or those money elsewhere. And I think the jury's still out on which is the best way to go there. And a lot of the CISO conversations that we have, the Chief Information Security Officer conversations that we have, there's a pretty healthy debate on whether it's a waste of money or whether we need to invest more there.
And obviously, you just mentioned the CISOs. Are you seeing that security is getting recognition at board level now? Are people beginning to understand the severity and of the issue?
Absolutely. So absolutely, the board is paying attention, primarily because of the cost of these breaches. And the massive increase in the cost of those breaches, and also just the public embarrassment when this thing hits the newspaper. And so there's a lot more attention at the senior levels, whether it's the board or the CEO, at wanting focus here, which is a blessing and a curse. As more focus comes, then more responsibility, and they're looking for the Chief Information Security Officer to really help them bridge from the technical reality of security to the business requirement. And help them understand how to manage risk a lot more effectively.
Yeah. So are you seeing a sort of an increase in investment in security now, would you say?
So I would say in the IT budgets last several years, security is one of the few areas in IT that is actually increasing in funding, and so the budgets are going up. I think the challenge is, where should we be spending? We did some research at HP around how much gets spent around that value chain that I talked about: research, infiltration, discovery, the bad guy process. In general, on average, companies spend 86% of all of their security budget just in stage 2.
Right.
And the reality is, if we're competing against the best in the world and they only need to be right once, we've got to have capabilities developed in some of these other categories. And so I think it's sort of beholden on the security professionals as well as these companies to start thinking more about how do they build capabilities at other layers. Where should that incremental dollar go? Should I buy that yet another blocking device, or realize, look, it's inevitable that they're going to get in somewhere. Let's build some capabilities elsewhere. And I think that's one of the big challenges companies have to figure out for themselves.
Sure. You mentioned things like various ISO standards and whatever, and undoubtedly there will be regulations in the US, and as there are in the UK and Europe.
Everywhere, yeah, they're increasing everywhere.
Well, I was going to say, do you think there needs to be additional ones, or do you think they're sufficient, or is it somewhere in between?
Yeah, I think these regulatory requirements, just in general, are a double-edged sword for security. I think and I'll try to explain what I mean. One of the really benefits of these requirements is it does, for the industry, raise the bar. It basically creates a standard of below which you are not allowed to be. And so as an industry, I think those standards have made us more secure. The challenge is, for an individual company, I don't think it is making them individually more secure. I think the challenge that happens is, because most of the CISOs are technical and they're looking for a way to have better business conversations, they use these regulatory requirements and these standards as a crutch in that conversation. And they say, I must do these things, check, 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 to be secure. And what we're doing is teaching executives, CEOs, board members who aren't as educated in security to aspire to the low bar. And so, if I do these things, then I'm safe, right? Yes, check, 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 here's your money, do your things. But the problem is, we're competing against this really efficient market-based adversary, and we're aspiring to the low bar. We're going to lose.
It's a bit like when people used to say, how could I get infected? I had antivirus.
Exactly. And we need a more elevated understanding of the risk we're taking in these things, and which of those checkboxes are relevant to us or not. What capabilities do we need that aren't articulated by the checkboxes? Because if you think about how a lot of these standards and policies are made, is they're negotiated and discussed in committee for 2 years before they're published. Well, the adversary is innovating at market rate. And so they're never going to be as current as the adversary's tactics. And so the reality is, we need to be a lot more innovative and a lot more focused on what the adversary is doing. They're necessary, they're important, but we can't be blinded by them, and we should definitely not be aspiring to the low bar.
Yeah, because the whole security industry, it's like an arms race, isn't it? You've got, like you said, the adversaries on one side and the security industry on the other side, vying for each other.
They are. I think the problem is, the companies, you can't compete. right? There's no way you can compete, and so the only way that you can be more effective, in my opinion, is you need to change what the game is. If you're going to play a game that you know you're going to lose, you should stop playing, right? or change the rules so you have more advantage. And I think this is why looking at their process, trying to be more disruptive to their process, make it more complicated for them. I think that's one approach that we need to start thinking about, be more effective at, and then just understanding what is important for our business, and then realizing, look, they're a market. It's a marketplace we're competing against. They're looking for the easiest, cheapest dollar. Just be more complicated than your peer group. Be more sophisticated than your peer group, and that market-based ecosystem will go away from you. And I think these are some of the tactics that I think individual companies can use to be more secure.
Yeah, is it a bit like they always used to say, if you lock your windows and your doors, the burglar will go to the house where they haven't locked the windows and the doors?
Yeah, exactly. Put an alarm sticker on the window, or do those things that just make it less attractive, or make it more complicated for the adversary. But again, it's a mind shift change from follow my checklist, do my technical framework, versus let's really pay attention to how they do it and just try to get in their way. Try to be a little more, think of it more like a war game. How do they do it? What should we do to counter? What would they do in response? And be more scenario based in the way we build security, and I think we'll be a lot more effective.
So would you say it's sort of it's a juggling, isn't it, of hardware, software, and techniques as well, would you say?
It's definitely a combination. I think the fallacy that a lot of these layer cake kind of architectural diagrams of security preach is that it's a product that will save you. And I'm the product guy, so it's hard for me to say this, but the reality is the technology itself is a tool for the people and processes you implement. And so one of the things that I'm very specific about when we talk to our customers is we are helping them build a capability, and that capability may include technology, but it needs to also include the expertise and the process to be able to execute it. And so whether that means we teach them how to do it, or they already know how to do it and they just are looking for a tool set, or they're wanting to outsource it to our services organization, a lot of the times it's that expertise and that process that actually makes it better, and the tool is helpful. And yes, different tools have different capabilities, but it's not all about that for sure.
Now, one of the first things you mentioned was was enterprises using different sort of platforms. So you've got people
mobile and cloud.
Exactly.
And,
So I mean, what sort of ways are you looking? Because obviously there's been a big trend of people bring their own device into work, or and things like that, and are moving data and what have you into the cloud. What sort of advice do you give to companies if they're sort of dabbling in those areas?
Right. So I mean, I think the requirements for those spaces are the same. How you implement security in those areas are sometimes different. But I think what we advise companies to think about is what data is your most important, who do you want to have access to it, and how you want to do it. Don't try to create the same level of security across your entire enterprise, because the reality is there's a whole bunch of stuff you just don't care if it gets stolen. And so be really specific about it. And then you can't get in the way of the adoption of these technologies. One, because you'll lose competitiveness at one end, you'll lose the people that want to use these. It'll be harder to hire and bring in a younger workforce into your environments because they expect this kind of capability. You don't want to have better technology at home than you have in the office, which is a reality in a lot of cases now. And so you need to be specific about what business capabilities you're going to deliver to some of these devices. Do you need the same access from a mobile phone that you need from a laptop? Do you want to give your employees choice of device, or do you want them to own the device? And what's the benefit of those two things? And I think these are the challenges that companies need to work through on their own, because every organization has its own requirements and its own risk factors. But starting with the data, understanding what's most important, and then defining what capabilities they need to deliver through which channel, I think is part of the process we would go through when we help our customers go through this. And then obviously we have technology and services to be able to help them secure some of these things. But again, it's less about oftentimes the product and more about the people and process.
Okay. So looking ahead, sort of the next 12, 18 months, what sort of security issues do you see potentially coming up that enterprises need to be aware of? Or
Yeah, I think the next 18 months they're going to deal with the exact same things they're dealing with now.
Of course.
And just because the challenge and the capability of the adversary is way far ahead of where the industry is in terms of its defenses. And so I think they're still going to be dealing with the fact that their users are being tricked into giving away credentials. I think they're still going to be dealing with the fact that the adversary is inside for a long time mapping out their environments, and it's become more and more expensive to get them out. And so I think the challenge for companies over the next 18 months is how do they build capabilities in their environments to reduce the damage that gets done. We just recently did a study with the Poneman Institute around the cost of cyber breach. And one of the things that came out of there was different capabilities that they could build that would radically reduce their exposure. And one of the capabilities is building in sort of security intelligence systems. So basically being able to find the adversary after they've broken in before they've stolen data. Traditional SIM or these kinds of sort of monitoring and security intelligence systems would reduce the cost of breach almost in half. And so I think there are some of these capabilities that I think they can build into the organization to reduce their exposure, but it's again the same stuff. If you're talking way out, what are some of the things that they're going to be focused on? I think the fact that the networks themselves are changing to being more software defined. I think the fact that more services will be consumed from the cloud. There's whole new platforms that they're going to have to worry about. So when I have a cell phone and I'm connecting to a cloud service sitting in some coffee shop somewhere, when I'm doing my work, that connection is a temporary network that's a corporate network. How do you capture that network? How do you secure it in the same way you would secure some of these others? I think these are the challenges that are going to come to our CIOs and CEOs in the next 5 years or so that they're going to have to worry about. And as more devices get connected, televisions, printers, all these things, this internet of everything, I think is going to really challenge the security industry more.
Now, over the years, it always used to be that the biggest threat to companies would be flaws in software, and this could be exploited by viruses. But obviously now you've got the whole hacker sort of side of things. Which do you think is more dangerous? But which do you think is more of a threat to business these days? Is it the hacker, or is it still the sort of vulnerability virus sort of side as well?
Well, I think those two things are married, so it's hard to say that it's one or the other in that case. I think what you're seeing is the challenge for the companies, in my opinion, is the massive diversity of the ecosystem they have to protect, whether it's the applications that they build themselves, the applications they download, or the applications their users bring in, and the vulnerabilities that are present there. I mean, 84% of all breaches take advantage of vulnerabilities in an application. We could radically reduce our exposure if we were just more focused on some of that. But the reality is in security, software security is like exercise, and people would rather take a diet pill. And so getting better at how we develop applications, being smarter about how we test for those vulnerabilities while we're building, I think will help companies because the attackers are basically taking advantage of those. That's one area. I think the other challenge is the user themselves. The user is the weakest part in the security chain. The effectiveness of the targeting, because we share so much of our lives on the internet through social networking and other things, it's very easy to create a contextual attack on an individual that's something only your friend should know about. And so that vulnerability, I think our security organizations are going to have to think about, how do I protect the user from themselves? And are there system things we can do? Are there technology things that we can do? Are there training things that we need to be investing in to help protect the user from themselves? I think that user and those applications are probably the biggest areas they need to worry about. The hacker or the community of thieves, essentially this marketplace, that's not going to change that much. They'll be more efficient and they'll be effective, but they're literally just exploiting the same stuff, the vulnerabilities that are there and the users that are in our environments.
Yeah, it's kind of like you were saying, going over to started out with phishing emails, but you get them from banks you never had an account with.
Exactly.
And now it's getting more targeted, what they call spearfishing,
Yeah.
whether they're picking out, so maybe they research you, they know what sports you
Absolutely.
like, and
Well,
books
I
you
can
read.
give you a personal example.
Yeah.
So I spoke at a privacy conference about 3 years ago in Canada, and about 2 weeks after the conference, I got an email from the conference organizer, who was a woman that I know. And this email said, "Hey Art, it was great to see you at the conference. I loved your speech on such and such. I hope you can join us in Vancouver next year at the conference. I took this picture of you when you were on stage. Thought you'd like to have it." Something, I'm narcissistic. I want to see this picture of myself, right? So right before I was going to click on it, I noticed that she sent me a picture of myself in a PDF format. And I'm a super geek and super paranoid, and so I noticed, well, why is it a PDF and not a JPEG file? And so, being paranoid, I sent that to the security research team that worked in our company at that point, and it actually was a picture of me from the conference, which is a little freaky. But it also had embedded malware that was uniquely written for that attack. And so it was a one-time malware written specifically for me in the context with something I had just done with the picture from the, and so the likelihood that most executives would click on that, incredibly high. Incredibly high. And so I think this is the challenge. This is sort of underscores the challenge of what we're facing.
Okay, so one sort of final question. If you could get every CIO in the world in one room, if that would ever be possible, what sort of one
on TV you can maybe.
What one piece of advice would you give them regarding securing their company?
Wow, one piece of advice. I think the one piece of advice I would give them is really spend the time to understand the information and the asset you care most about. And then focus on building your capabilities to be disruptive, to protect that thing. If they spend more of their energy on understanding that and understanding the adversary, I think they'll be more secure. And so I think if they did that in the future, listen to the data that you have, listen to the things you do, but focus your response in that method, I think they'll be more secure.
Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you ever so much for your time.
That's my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Great.